Hi, Mark Donovan here, and today I'm going to give a presentation on how to become an airline pilot. I recently gave this presentation to a number of possible flight students at the flight school I instruct at Laconia Flight Academy, and I figured I'd go over this presentation today and make it into a video to possibly help out some other people considering pursuing a career in the airlines as a pilot. So follow along.
To the mountain.
So, how to become an airline pilot? First of all, let's talk about how you need to qualify to become an airline pilot. I'm going to talk about particularly initially Part 61 flight school programs and how the kind of curriculum looks. It works pretty much the same as the Part 141, but there's some differences and we're going to get into that later. So first of all, you need to get your private pilot certificate. It's a 6 to 8 month effort. If you're flying a couple times a week, typically, it requires a minimum of 40 hours of flight time per the FAA. The reality is it's probably going to be more like 55 to 65 hours if you're working diligently at it. The cost is somewhere between $13 and $16K, and it'll vary depending where you're getting the flight instruction at, what type of aircraft you're using, etc. The next rating after you get your private pilot certificate is your instrument rating. And again, this can take 6 to 8 months. It requires a minimum of 40 hours of simulator or actual instrument flight training. And you, in addition, need to build some cross-country time. You need actually a total of 50 hours of piloting command cross-country time by the time you go to submit your application to apply for your instrument rating. The cost for that effort is somewhere between $14 and $15K. That's based on our flight school and the type of aircraft we're using and where we're located, which is in Laconia, New Hampshire. It'll vary depending where you are, what type of, again, aircraft you're using. After you get your instrument rating, you need to go earn your commercial pilot certificate. This can be done as short as 2 to 4 months. It requires 20 hours of flight training, and it requires, before you submit your application to apply to have the check ride for your commercial pilot certificate, a total of 250 hours of flight time, 100 hours of pick time. And I should caveat the 250 hours of flight time. 50 of it can actually be done in a simulator, but you are definitely going to be doing some time building between your instrument rating and your commercial pilot certificate to reach that 250 hours of flight time, again with 50 hours possibly being used on a simulator. The cost for that is somewhere between 8 to 10K, and that's not for the time building components. Neither was the time building components factored in for the cost for the instrument rating. After you get your commercial pilot certificate, you move on to your CFI certificate. And this allows you to flight instruct and ultimately build time to the magic 1,500 hours to apply to the airlines. So the CFI requires anywhere from 2 to 4 months of effort. It can be done quicker. I've had students get it done in 2 months, and I've had students take 5 to 7 months. It really depends on them. This is a rating or a certificate that really requires next level knowledge and understanding. The student has to build lesson plans or purchase some initial lesson plans and then modify them to their specific needs. It requires only a commercial pilot's license to apply for this rating. There's no set number of hours of flight training that's required. It's just that they've got to be proficient in teaching all the maneuvers as well as have the lesson plans so they can teach all the technical subject matters. And the cost of that is roughly 8 to 10K. Again, it varies where you are. And again, once you get that CFI rating, or certificate, you can now start building time, earning some money, and building hours toward the 1,500 hour target for flying for the airlines. Often, students will go on from there and get their CFII so they can teach instrument instruction, and that can be done in about 1 to 3 months of effort. And the advantage of that certificate is now, instead of just teaching private pilot students or commercial pilot students, they can also teach instrument students. Cost of getting the CFII is 4 to 5K typically. Beyond that, you're going to need a multi-engine, commercial multi-engine certificate with the instrument rating add-on, and that's 1 to 2 months of effort. You can usually get it sometimes in just a week or two. If you go to certain quickie places, they'll give you 5 to 10 hours, and as long as you can do all the maneuvers and fly the instrument approaches, etc., you can get that done fairly quick. But the cost is typically about $5 to $7K. Now, once you've done all the training, got all those certificates and ratings, and you've built your 1,500 hours or nearly the 1,500 hours, you qualify for applying for the airlines. Now let's look at the total cost. So total flight training costs is $52 to $63K under a Part 61 program. You're going to have to spend some additional money building that pick time for your instrument experience. So that's another roughly $10K. And then I assumed about 120 hours of additional cross-country or flying time to get to the magic 250 hours for the commercial. So another $23K I think I factored in here. So the total cost from private pilot to commercial multi-engine, you're looking around $85 to $96K is the time I'm filming this video. And you're going to get it done in between 18 to 29 months. And there's much quicker ways to get it done. We'll talk about that later, but for Part 61 flight school program, that's what we're looking at. Let's talk a little bit more about the types of flight schools. We have Part 61 flight schools. These are regulations from the FAA that allow flexibility, and we'll talk about that more. And roughly 77% per the FAA this year indicated that private pilot students go to these Part 61 schools to get their private pilot certificate. Later on, when they're working for higher ratings, they may go to a Part 141 school, and that 77% number will drop down to something less than that. So Part 61 flight schools offer flight training flexibility. There's not a rigid syllabus that's absolutely hardcore required by the part, like in a Part 141 school or the FAA. So you can adapt for the weather conditions or the pilot's rate of growth or understanding of subject matter or flight skills. So that's one of the nice advantages of Part 61. It normally costs significantly less in terms of dollars. It normally takes longer, however, to get through for all the various pilot certificates and ratings. There's usually fewer financing options and does not have examining authority. So typically with a Part 61 school, the way it always is actually, when a student is ready for having their check ride, they have to fill out an application for their practical test, and they're going to be presented to an FAA designated pilot examiner who's going to do the check ride on them. The lead time or wait times for these check rides is anywhere from 1 to 2 months typically we're seeing today, more toward the 2 months. So in a Part 141 school that has examining authority, they can actually do the check ride, if you will, right there on the spot at the flight school and basically cut out the DPE lag time. So in regards to Part 141 flight schools, they have very rigid flight training programs due to significant FAA oversight and monitoring. They must progress in a specific sequence that's been approved by the FAA and monitored regularly by the FAA. Typically, you're going to see significantly more expense associated with this, 25 to 30% more than, let's say, a Part 61 school. So you're looking at $120K or beyond. For example, the time building from between the private and the instrument for all of those 50 cross-country pick hours. Some of these Part 141 flight schools, after the student gets their private pilot certificate, won't let that private pilot in their program fly the plane by themselves. They'll have to have an instructor on board and have to pay for those costs. And there's numerous other reasons, but that's why you're looking at significantly more money being spent under Part 141 school. You can get through these programs much quicker. And I've seen certain individuals get through these flight school programs within about 12 months. They also offer more financing options. They're just more available, partly because it's so tightly monitored by the FAA. Loan institutions will feel more comfortable because of the significant more FAA oversight. It's also easier to qualify for use of the GI Bill for paying for this type of education. A Part 141 flight school is typically more unforgiving if student struggles. For example, 2 check ride failures, they may be kicked out and they may get limited or no refund for not completing the program. Again, these Part 141 schools may have examining authority, eliminating the long waits associated with the DPE check rides. Now, Part 141 schools can be independent flight schools, not related or associated with a university or college. ATP flight school is a prime example. Or they could be associated with a university or college where a student earns a certificate and a degree. So Embry-Riddle is an example, University of North Dakota, Purdue University, and closer to home where I'm from, Southern Hampshire University. They don't have flight school directly, but they have flight or aviation type management programs at the university. And people can, at Southern Hampshire University, can go for a private pilot's license and all the ratings at an independent flight school and get college credit for it from Southern Hampshire University while also earning their aviation management degree or whatever it is in aviation. Now, once you get all those certificates I talked about earlier and you've got all your hours built, now you need to go earn an airline transport pilot certificate. What are the qualifications for that? Well, for an ATP, Airline Transport Certificate, you need to be 23 years old, and you need to have a commercial pilot certificate and an instrument rating, and you need to meet a required number of flight hours. Now, we always hear about the magic 1,500 hours of total flight time, but there's a little bit more detail to that. You need 500 hours of cross-country flight time. You need 100 hours of night cross-country flight, or 100 hours of night flight time, and there's some nuances in that makes it a little bit easier, but we won't get into that now. There's 50 hours in multi-engine airplane time, and there's 75 hours of instrument time, simulated or actual or in full motion sim, such as a Redbird simulator would count, and 250 hours of pilot and command time in airplanes. You also need a first-class medical, and if you meet all those requirements, you will also need to then go and get some additional ATP certificate training. Basically, it's an ATP CTP program that you go for 1 or 2 weeks, and you're basically going to do a lot of groundwork, and you're going to fly in some full motion sims, Class D type sims, and at the end of it, you'll have completed an ATP ATM knowledge test from the FAA, and you will be prepared to then go have an eventual practical exam check ride for your ATP license later on. Now, what if you're not 23 years old? People are getting all these ratings when they're 19 or 20 years old. Can you still go get a restricted, can you still fly for the airlines? Yes, with a restricted ATP, but there's some qualifications. So the restricted ATP allows for pilots to have, in certain cases, less than 1,500 hours of flight time or be below the age of 23 to be a first officer working for, let's say, a regional airline. The flight hours are fairly much the same. The one big caveat here, again, you need, at the top level, you need the 1,500 hours with some exceptions, which we'll get into in a minute. You only need 200 hours of cross-country time, and then 100 hours of nighttime, 50 hours of multi-engine, 75 hours of instrument time, and again, 250 hours of pilot and command time in airplanes. As I indicated a minute ago, that you can possibly get in with less than 1,500 hours and under age 23. And for example, if you're a military pilot coming out of the military and you have at least 750 hours, you can qualify for restricted ATP. If you go to a fully accredited university or college that has an aviation program and get a bachelor's degree, you can qualify for a restricted ATP with only 1,000 hours. If you go to a college and get an associate's degree in an aviation major, you can qualify for 1,250 hours of flight time. Again, while earning a degree. And again, lastly, for pilots who are less than 23 years old, who are at least 21 years old and have 1,500 hours of flying experience or meet these other qualifications, they can get the restricted ATP. I highly recommend in this field that you consider getting that college degree and having a backup plan. We'll get into the reasons why shortly, but it's not a bad idea to go ahead and go to a college and get that 4-year or 2-year degree so that you don't have to build as many hours for qualifying for restricted ATP. And in addition, you have a backup plan if something goes wrong with a health issue or your career plans in the airlines. How to pay for flight training? Well, you can pay out of your pocket. Often you can purchase block time from flight schools to save money up to maybe 10% of the cost. You can get loans, AOPA finance or flight training finance. You can go to Laconia Flight Academy's website here and look at some of the options. There are also many different scholarships. AOPA offers scholarships, air traffic controllers, Civil Air Patrol, Alaska Airmen. All the airlines usually have some type of program There's the 99s program for women, and so on and so forth. So again, go to Laconia Flight Academy's website and you can see some of those places where you can apply for scholarships. And then for some, the GI Bill for military veterans is an option. They'll pay for flight training at approved flight school and must be a resident with the school. Now that said, when I say resident with the school, some of the schools that are qualifying today, like Liberty University, is an online school, and that works. They'll take the GI Bill. Typically, Part 141 schools associated with university or colleges such as Embry-Riddle or, again, Liberty University would qualify for using the GI Bill. A little bit more on the GI Bill. Generally, the GI Bill doesn't pay for flight training as a part of a 61 flight school, but there are exceptions. The GI Bill can cover Part 61 flight training, but only under very special circumstances. It primarily depends on whether the flight training is part of an approved degree program at an institution of higher learning. If the Part 61 flight training is incorporated into an undergraduate degree program at Institute of Higher Learning, it may be covered post 9/11 with the GI Bill. The degree program could be in a field like aeronautical science, aviation management, or professional piloting. So you've got to be in a degree program that's associated with aviation. You just can't go major in environmental sciences or something. You've got to major in something in aviation. And again, that all works toward that 1,250 hours or 1,000 hours maximum hours you need to qualify for the restricted ATP. Again, these types of programs usually partner with flight schools, which could be Part 61, but more often than not, they're Part 141. That's the majority of them are Part 141. So check with your college to see if any of these might be appropriate, if they have the appropriate aviation degree programs, and see if they're partnered with any flight schools. Talk a little bit about medicals. There's 3 types of classes of medicals. There's the Class 1, which is required for the airline transport pilot. I highly recommend, if you're thinking about going to the airlines and you're going to get flight training, before you even start the flight training, go get the first class medical to make sure you have no health issues. Second class, required to exercise commercial pilot privileges. So if you just want to be a commercial pilot flying Part 135 operations, charter type services, often all that's required. And then the third class is normally for your private pilot, private instrument pilot. But again, if you're thinking you're going all the way to the airlines, or even flying for somebody like NetJets or FlexJet or something like that, those are Part 135 operations. They typically would want a first class medical. Again, the higher the class medical, the more privileges you get. And here I show kind of a chart. If you're under 40 years old, when you get a medical, it's good for up to 5 years. However, the first class privileges are only good for a year, and they run in parallel with the second class privileges that you can exercise. And then after the first year, it reverts to a Class 3 for the remaining months toward that 60 months or 5-year period. If you're over 40 years old, the first class medical is only good for 6 months. And in parallel to that, the second class will run for a total of 12 months. And then after that, for the remaining 12 months, it's third class privileges. So if you're over 40, you're getting a physical every 2 years. Remember, you're always only one medical away from losing your medical. So focus on staying fit and living healthy, and always have a backup plan. That's why I recommend getting those college degrees as well, so that in the event you have a medical problem, you're able to pursue another line of work. Let's talk about the flow from regional airlines to the majors. So I give a list here of typical regional airlines in the United States, and after 2 to 3 years of usually working for them, you can qualify for the major airlines. So what do regional pilots make today, as of the writing of this presentation? So I just gave an example. GoJet Airlines, starting pay for first officers, roughly $100K per year, $90 per hour flight time. There's a per diem of $1.90 per hour. There's a sign-on bonus of $18,000, paid over 24 months, and they guarantee minimum of 75 hours per month. So you put it all together, it's just a little bit over $100K. First-year captains that can qualify with only 750 hours after being a first officer can be starting out at $130K. And direct entry captains that may have come from other regional airline to go to GoJets, they can be starting out at $200K. For more information on GoJet, for example, go to airlinepilotcentral.com and look at their details. Or if you just go to airlinepilotcentral.com, you can look up any airline you want to see what the individual pay and benefits are. how many aircraft they have in their fleet, how many people are working, how many people are furloughed, etc. Now, what about the major airlines? So Delta Airlines, I gave for example, starting salaries for first officers about $114K. So if you're a captain at a regional, you may take a step back when you go to the majors, but it's short-lived. You're not going to be suffering for too long. The average first officer salary is $191K per year. Top salary for an FO ranges, but it's roughly $230K per year. Total pay range for first officers between $132 to $244K, including base salary and additional pay, like per diem and things like that. Captain salaries can range anywhere from $290 to $370K per year. And again, you can go to airlinepilotcentral.com to learn more about individual airlines regarding pay, benefits, aircraft, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to step back a little bit and go on to what it takes to get your private pilot certificate, as that is the first rating you want to get or first license you want to get. And it's going to be for airplane single engine. You have to be 16 years old to solo. You have to be 17 years old to speak, read, and write English. And you need to obtain a student pilot certificate or license initially. And you need to pass at least a third class medical. Again, I recommend the class 1 if you're thinking you're going to the airlines. Again, you have to log a minimum of 40 hours of flight time with at least 20 hours with a CFI. You can expect to probably spend 55 to 65 hours of flight time, and it'll probably be more closer to 40 hours or 45 hours with an instructor to get this license. You may be fortunate, you may be skilled, where you may be able to reduce that time and get closer to the 40 hours, but I haven't seen too many people that get it near the 40 hours. You have to pass a pre-solo test prior to the CFI soloing you, something that the CFI administers and grades and keeps on file. You also have to pass an aeronautical knowledge test for private pilot license. You take that at a testing center, and after that test is done and all the training is done, the CFI will present you with an application to a designated pilot examiner, and you'll do an oral knowledge test. I say 1 to 1.5 hours here, can go up to 2 or 3 hours sometimes. And then if that goes well, DP will tell you to go pre-flight the plane. You get into the plane and do a check ride flight for an hour to an hour and a half, where they're going to take you through all the maneuvers. It really starts out with a cross-country flight plan that you've planned, and you start to fly that cross-country flight plan, and then they'll break it off, and you'll start doing all the maneuvers you trained for during your pilot training period. If all goes well, they'll give you a certificate at the end, temporary pilot certificate, and you've got your private pilot's license. And you repeat this process pretty much all the way through instrument, your commercial, your CFI, your CFII, multi-engine, etc., ATP. Minimum flight requirements for private pilot certificate. You need 40 hours of flight time overall, as I said, 20 with an instructor or CFI or II. You've got to have, in regards to the minimum amount of training, 3 hours of cross-country flight training, 3 hours of night flight training, which involves 1 cross-country flight at night, over 100 nautical miles total distance, round trip, 10 takeoff and landings at night to a full stop. You need 3 hours of simulated instrument time, wearing foggles, where you're only flying relative to the reference to the instruments. And then you need 3 hours of training with an instructor within 2 months of taking the practical exam or the check ride. In addition to that, you also need to have 10 hours of solo time, which consists of at least 5 hours of cross-country solo flight, 1 long cross-country solo flight of 150 nautical miles, and then you also have to do at least 3 takeoff and landings at a towered airport solo. So most efficient way to become a private pilot, ideally pass your written knowledge test first. 99% of the people don't, but I recommend it. Hit the books early, so when you get in the cockpit, you're sitting there putting into practice what you've learned on the ground. So if you can't get it done first, at least by the time you solo, you should be either having it done or close to having that written test done. The FAA knowledge test, as the time of this presentation, is $175. Other thing is, have the funds budgeted in advance to get the license. Don't try to spoon feed this along, because you'll find yourself stopping and starting and stopping and starting, and you really want to try to stay consistent in the flight training so that you don't get rusty. It's not just a combination of all the knowledge, but it's also the muscle memory of doing all the maneuvers. And if you're taking large gaps of time to get back into the plane, you'll lose some of that muscle memory. And again, you're going to spend $13 to $16K to get the private pilot certificate. Try to fly at least twice a week or more if possible. Complete the pre-solo test as well in advance of being ready to solo, so when your instructor thinks you're ready, he can jump out of the plane and you can be on your way. If possible, stick with one CFI. Okay, so if you're at a flight school where they're moving you around to different CFIs, demand that you focus with one CFI or find another flight school. Each CFI has to make sure that you're proficient in all maneuvers before they can solo you or solo you to cross-country flight, etc. So if you're getting shuffled around by CFIs, you're wasting money. Material to study for your private pilot certificate. Going old school here, the Airplane Flying Handbook from the FAA and the Pilot Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. These books are fantastic. They're frankly well written. They're well imaged in terms of graphics and pictures. And pretty much every online ground school course or ground school course you take or any other book that's out there in the market all comes from this information. Highly recommend you get these books. You can either download them for free from the FAA's website or purchase them. And that's pretty much what's involved with becoming an airline pilot and how to start off getting that private pilot certificate. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and if you did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or comments on what I presented, leave them below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible.